Hi, I'm Richard Lund. To my friends, co-workers, I'm Dick Lund. I'm a retiree from the Forest Service. I've retired after roughly 34 years with them and enjoying it. I was born and raised in Southern California, the big town of Pasadena. Many years, pleasurable years. Fondly remember growing up in that area. I grew up in a family that believed in camping and visiting the desert or the mountains whenever possible. And we did that. I became a scout, Cub Scout, went through the Boy Scouts, Explorer Scouts, and even into a leadership role, Eagle Scout, all enjoyable camping experiences in the mountains and whatever. Where I grew up was just a few miles south of the Angeles National Forest. And in fact, we sit on the front porch, we could look up at the mountains and see Mount Wilson. Beautiful views, no timber, lots of brush, but beautiful views still of the Angeles National Forest. Some memories were influenced a little bit by aspects that maybe weren't so beautiful. The fires. We had a good front row seat on some of the fires that burned on the Angeles. We also had a front row seat with some of the debris and such that ran down from erosion after the fires. And it got me thinking a little bit, interested. But I think probably about 9 years old, 10 years old, I felt that I had a commitment, and it was to forestry. I wanted to be something working with forestry. At that time, I had no idea what a forester was, but yeah, I wanted to be in the woods. I wanted to do something, and I aimed that direction. Went through the public schools in Pasadena. Went through the last 2 years of John Muir Junior College, which was actually glorified high school. Went to Pasadena City College, which again was community college, 2 years. Graduated from the Pasadena City College, and I got a summer job with the U.S. Forest Service on the Chilao Hot Shots, fighting fire. And that was some experience. That was many long days, lots of toil that I never experienced before. But that fire experience, that experience during the summer, we were on long days, 12-hour days, 16-hour days. Sometimes it was stretched out to 2 days. We enjoyed not only in fighting fire there on the Angeles, but we also made one jaunt at least up to the Mendocino National Forest in the old C-47 plane that had the original jump seats along the side, and rattled as you flew. You looked out the windows of the plane, and the tips of the wings were going up and down, and you landed, and we made it. It was enjoyable. That was the summer. That was the first summer with the Forest Service, and again, lots of work, but enjoyable. Went back and finished education there at the Pasadena City College the last year, and then from there I applied to a Cal, but they required you to go to a summer session, and again, new experience, and again, for new, yes, tent, sit out there or camp in the tent cabins and whatever. finished that up, and then the first year of Cal at Berkeley. I managed to finish the first year, but they also had a program coordinated with the Forest Service that provided you with a summer job if you so desired it. You went upstairs. Mulford Hall was a 3-story building. The 3rd story was occupied by the experiment station at that time. And the regional office of the Forest Service in San Francisco set up an office special for hiring summer employees. And I applied for a job, and I had hoped to get a job lined up on the Angeles, and that was pretty much what was done. It was a job that was oriented towards erosion, debris control, which is something at that time I was remembering back to the years, I could see this debris running down, the mud running down the gutters and so on, was something that I was very much interested in. 2 weeks before I was to report, I got word that they wanted to see me again upstairs, and I got the news that that job fell through. The Forest Service did not get the funding that they had anticipated, but they had another possibility if I was interested, and that was on a timber inventory crew located on the Tahoe National Forest at Nevada City. Kind of puzzled. Tahoe National Forest. Okay, I'm not real sure where that was. Nevada City? Nevada City? We're in California. Do I have to go to Nevada? Questions. I'm not familiar with Northern California or even Central California. But okay, I needed a job. I was not financially wealthy. I needed help get the money coming in, so I took the job, reported for work, and spent a very surprising, enjoyable summer, which ended up at the end of the summer meeting with the timber management officer on that forest, in addition to my immediate supervisor during the summer, with a question, would you be interested in coming back to the Tahoe National Forest upon your graduation from Cal? And I kind of surprised. Yes, very much. I went back down to Cal and back to school, finished the classes. Some of them were a struggle. I was not a straight A student. Worked on the classes, but also got involved in something else down there. One of the professors at the school, Harold Biswell, was a range individual and had taken a range class from him, but he also was very much interested in controlled fire and burning. And he had 2 sites that he was working with, and I became an employee of his on weekends. And we would drive from the campus there at Berkeley up to Hobart's, Clear Lake, or Lake County, and we would work according to what he wanted done, whether it was piling brush, whether it was burning, or whatever, and get involved in some early aspects of the work that he was doing on prescribed burning, which he later worked with Yosemite National Park and helped create their total program for prescribed fires. Very interesting work. Graduated from school, reported for work at Nevada City, where I was back doing essentially the same kind of a job that I had the summer before, except on this jaunt, I was a supervisor of the crews. And we completed a lot of installation of permanent growth plots as well as temporary measurements for the management plan, forest management plan, timber. The first year was totally inventory. That winter, spent a lot of time mapping, working up the data that we had collected. Computers at that time were almost non-existent, so a lot of the work was by hand. Next season, another crew, and we went out to complete the work. We got a little handicapped this time, though. Halfway through the season, fires, lots of fires. And we immediately in a situation where we had to fight fire on an adjoining district. The inventory work was forgotten for a while. We got to the point where we helped lay out sales, we helped administer sales. This was myself as well as my crew. We got involved in scaling 38 log loads of loads coming through logs. You end up scaling. We had a visit from the regional check scaler that wanted to make sure that we were doing the jobs right. He walked up and saw the 36 log load and says, "I'll be back next month." Anyway, we finish up that season, again, doing the sale administration on burned timber. Immediately after that, got caught up in sale administration again. Forgot to mention, when I graduated from Berkeley and going to Nevada City there for my first job, I felt pretty good because I had, number one, I'd graduated from school. Number two, I had a permanent position with the Forest Service. And the third item, probably the best item of all, is I met my wife on a blind date, and we got married the next year. About this time, this ties back to the salvage again, and I had to move to Camptonville that year. No place to live. Camptonville was on Highway 49, small little town. Finally borrowed a camp trailer from the Blisterus crew that wasn't going to use their trailer that year. We got it located next to the Forest Service station, out behind a barn. So our front yard was a barn. Our backyard was blackberries. And I, did pretty well because I went to work for the day. The wife was stuck in the trailer. Little trailer, no air conditioning. Bathroom facilities, we dug a pit out behind the trailer in a blackberry patch and put a little outhouse. She was pregnant. Not very nice. Pretty rough on her. Her dad stopped by, who happened to be a faller, and I got to do something about this. And he volunteered his swamp cooler, and we put it up against the window of the camp trailer, so there was some cool air coming through. You ever try to pass a pregnant gal in a camp trailer? And well, anyway, it was very tight. But we got through that year. We managed to move into a house down the road a little bit later. The house was made totally out of mill ends. How they did it, I don't know, but it was not much larger than the camp trailer, but it was larger. Enjoyable. The administration of the salvage sales that I was doing at Camptonville, they were all fire. It was about 60 million board foot salvage divided up into 4 sales. Those were my sales that I had to administer. They were all under contract. to the same timber operator, which helped some, but he had one or two sides going on each one of those sales. So it might as well have been, different purchasers, but you lived with it. The timber sale contract was one of the old timber sale contracts. It's called a 2402. This was a contract that's written in such a way that most of the language requires the operator to do the work as required by the sale officer, as required by the Forest Service. It doesn't spell out exactly what it is, but the forest officer is God as far as the purchasers are concerned, because you do the work according to whatever is said. Poor contract, but it gave massive control to the Forest Service, supposedly. While at Camptonville with the fire salvage sales, they had to be marked. They were originally laid out by, the regional office crew came up and laid out sales. Abnormal situation, but with all the fires going on and the mass work that needed to be done, they managed to do that. But the sale still had to be marked. So while you were administering the sale, you were still expected to designate what trees were to be cut or not cut. We used to leave tree mark or cut tree mark depending on the number of trees. But one of the guidelines that we used in determining whether the trees should be cut or not was guidelines that had recently been developed and in fact hadn't yet been formalized. So we were testing those guides, and this is a mortality standard that was to be used in the region thereafter. It was a well worthwhile effort. It looked at trees in terms of whether they had been 100% killed or only partially killed. Would they survive? Were they missing all the needles? Were the needles frozen in the direction of the fire? Were they completely girdled? That means that, was the cambium layer completely burned or not? These guidelines were long needed and would be used in the future, and in the future of my job, they came in handy. I got an offer to go to the adjacent district, Downieville District, as the district timber management officer, which was great as far as I was concerned. Just, you get out of mill-end houses and the camp trailers and live in something spacious, something big, something glorious. Yeah, okay. We located a house that's set above one of the roads in Downeyville. Well, if you've ever been to Downeyville, Downeyville is a beautiful little town situated at the forks of two rivers. And the houses, most of them are pretty small. Ours was pretty small, it was pretty old, and it had problems. I mean, the front room was separating from the main house, but you still occupied it. The job there, I found out, was not quite what I expected. Your timber management officer, I had exactly zero people reporting to me. Well, not zero. I had a scaler that scaled on the mill deck. But other than that, that was it. And the volume that was expected to be produced was roughly 28-30 million board foot per year that you were expected to prepare and administer after you've sold it. This is great. How do you do this? You work your butt off. The old timber cutting techniques up until that time were what was called a individual tree selection, but modified to quite an extent. It was a risk cut. If the trees were expected to die before 10 years, those are trees that would probably be cut. No other scientific basis to it other than trying to figure out which trees are expected to live and which would not. We had one sale that had to be administered, and it was a chief's sale, a sale over 50 million board foot. Could not be changed, really, unless you had some real strong arguments. We changed it once because we couldn't come up with the volume. The word that we had after that was complete the sale. No further changes or revisions. So we were logging on slopes in excess of 50% with cats. No cable systems, cats. And pulling lots of line, whatever. We did it. My father-in-law was a faller on that sale. And it's a good thing he was a good faller, because otherwise he would have lost the trees down to the river. But he got them. That was a time frame when the Forest Service was converting over, trying to do away with this risk cutting, trying to get to more of a scientific effort to manage the forest. And they developed what was called a unit area control concept, UAC. It had a lot of things going for it. It was not textbook in the sense of the textbooks that you had at school, clear cut and shelterwood and this type of applications. But it had something going for it, something to get away from the risk cut that was supposed to rapidly create a system where the forest could then be managed. We tried to put it into existence. A lot of time was spent out on the stump trying to figure out where and what we were going to do with this, given piece of land. We made some good efforts. The Forest Service got a lot of flack over UAC, unit area control. I'm believing a lot of that came from academic communities, but it ended up the UAC models were discarded, and as a result, textbook systems came back into play with a lot of emphasis on even age control. More efficient, easier to apply, record keeping much simpler. So we tried doing that. Back at Downeyville, when first reported to work at Downeyville, the office that we had was a fairly small office, and the permanent force at that office was the district ranger, the assistant district ranger / fire control officer. He had a dual responsibility, the district clerk, and myself. 4 of us in the office. However, even the office could not handle that number of people all that well. I shared the office with the district ranger. The district ranger had business to take care of that was privileged, private, whatever. I had to leave. Often though, I was in the field, but no big problems. But it seemed really rare that you were able to occupy the same space as a district ranger in his office. At that district also, we had over 1,200 mining claims. Now this created a little bit of a problem because of conflicts, potential conflicts. If you're laying out a timber sale, you try to avoid the anguish, the conflicts of mining claims as much as possible. This also happened to be a time frame when the surface right determinations were just finishing up. So you had some mining claims that had reserved surface rights. These were the mining claims that had value, supposedly, that would provide a income to the miner. If it was determined that the income was not there, then the surface rights were not available to that claimant. He still had rights, though, to protect his improvements. And we still had great problems in trying to identify where the mining claims were and what kind of improvements, who to contact, and get that mess ironed out. Time frames, we were still utilizing the 2402 contract that I'd mentioned previously. We were in the throes of converting over to a new contract, a 2405 contract that better defined terms and requirements from both parties. It reflected more of the environmental concerns that were being developed at that time. And it was an effort to get away from, some of the simple forest officer in charge type of language and type of problems, really, when you get right down to it. The 2402 contract, again, was a forest officer in charge. There were some requirements spelled out in addition to that, but it was not a well-defined item. We didn't have, at that period of time, we didn't have environmental analysis yet. That came about with, a little later down the road. We had what was called a timber sale report that was prepared initially for each timber sale, timber sale report and appraisal prior to advertisement. And the timber sale report identified where the sale was, what conflicts may exist with that timber sale, and how it was going to be resolved. But much more than that, it didn't cover. Maybe it was a 10-page report. It was not made up by anyone other than the person that was putting that sale package together. You did not have a lot of good, firm end targets, and things developed there. It was hopefully come out right. And for the most part, some of the timber sale administrators weren't all that gifted either. They weren't all that experienced. Myself, I had 2 years of sale administration experience, but that was it. Okay, Downeyville during the floods. Yes, very. We were living in a house on the hill that we'd first moved into, and it got to the point where we wanted to get something a little better, and we did. We found another place that was down closer to the center of town, right opposite a motel. Beautiful little cottage, nice house, well maintained, had a front yard even. It was 2-story. The bottom story was not really available for use other than having one room down there, but it had some place to store stuff. Our recently married gifts that hadn't yet been opened. Our family at that time was increasing slowly. We had one boy and one on the way. We moved into that house and went on a vacation down to Southern California, visit my folks. Came back and found out that there had been a flood. And the Forest Service people were kind enough. They had gone and removed the freezer, chest freezer that we had in the bottom of that house, and brought it over to the compound. So the freezer and the goods in the goods in the freezer were salvaged. Of course, the district made use of the freezer too with some of their stuff, but saved our freezer, saved the house. The bottom level of the house had been flooded. There was a lot of mud and stuff in there. We lost all of the gifts yet that we hadn't gotten to, but no serious damage to the house or to anything that we had upstairs. Living accommodations were still good. We managed to get the chest back and everything was great. Next winter we had another storm. Wife was expecting any time. She had gone down to her folks in Nevada City and stayed there with them until her due date, which was just a matter of weeks away. The flood hit and it wiped out roads between Downeyville and Nevada City, where her folks were located. Wiped out some roads above too, but not 100%. Serious damage to the highways. News media somehow got a hold of this information that there was a woman in Downeyville that was expecting, and there was no doctors. What were they going to do? How were they going to handle it? Well, it so happened there was another Forest Service employee's wife that was in the same shape, and she had also visiting her folks, again in that same Nevada City area. So everything was hunky-dory. Flood damage, but no damage to us at least. I managed to get down to her before she had her delivery, but in order to do it, had to go an extra 200 miles to get to Nevada City. We had to go up via Sierraville and around Feather River, Oroville, and back to Nevada City. That was kind of a round-robin trip. But we made it. Damage to the town, damage to the highways, we made it fine. Okay, in the move to San Francisco, this came about with a promotion to San Francisco regional office. Completely foreign to my wife. She was born in Lakeview, lived in small towns all of her life. All of a sudden, big city. She did well, but we had some concerns. She took to it fine. The office that I worked in was located on Sansom Street in the middle of the business district of San Francisco. Kind of a difference for me too. Have to wear a suit or tie every day. No, that's foreign, but we had to do that. That was what was required. This is business attire. You were working in the city, and no sports shirts. Tie required. The only time you didn't have to have that sports coat or suit coat on is when you were sitting at your desk in the office. You went upstairs to coffee, you put your coat on. Other than that, why, you wore that coat all the time. The building was not air conditioned. It got a little unbearable during some of the days down there, but you were still expected to do that. The job that I went into down there was the cell prep and valuation, something a little foreign to me also. I'd worked on the sale appraisals at the district level, so I knew somewhat of a background there. The appraisal technique was what was called a residual technique. You developed the selling price of lumber, deducted the cost of logging, the cost of manufacturing, and allowed a reasonable profit margin, and that was what the sale was advertised at. But in order to do that, you had to come up with all sorts of techniques to handle that. First of all, you had to come up with a selling price of lumber. Well, okay, we could get lumber values, but how did that apply to the tree? That's where log grading came in. You had trees that were sitting out there in the woods, some of them beautiful trees, clear, some of them knottier than hell, but you had to estimate what the lumber would be coming from that tree. Log grades provided the answer as long as you had the methods to determine what would be coming from that. Mill studies. This is a study conducted by the experiment station that required each log, representative log, to be followed through the mill, determine what lumber came from that log. I was involved in several of those. Your sample that would be run through the mill would be probably about 100 logs, but you'd have to have people scattered all through that mill identifying what boards came from what log, so that you could trace back and the log grades. So the mill studies were a very detailed, very costly, very labor intensive, and not only on the Forest Service part, because the Forest Service had to furnish the manpower to follow each log through, but also on the part of industry. There had to be a willingness on the part of industry to allow that to happen, because it did involve time, time that they would normally be spending with running the logs through and developing the lumber on a fast process. Instead, they had to put up with people all over the place with paint cans, with creel, with all, marking things. So, again, it was costly, but it was a process that was determined to be very adequately valued from the standpoint of value. The residual value appraisals were good in terms of several things. If you had high valued trees, they came close to developing a good estimated selling price on the other end. It, represent a fair return to the people of the United States. If you had a large number of mills, it would be much better. If few mills, lower quality material, a residual value appraisal probably was not justified. As it is right now, you're back to you've gotten rid of that system completely, and you're to a transaction evidence appraisal. Okay, we had the mill studies. We had another study also that was called batch tests. The batch tests were smaller mill-directed efforts, but it was to determine what kind of an overrun could be expected from a small number of sample through that mill. And you ran several of these to determine the overrun factors and test as you develop in the process. It was a kind of a continuous type of effort to come up with a valid overrun, determine the log versus the lumber production. I led one of those. I won't mention the name of the mill. I won't mention the location of the mill. It was a mill that was in a large ownership. It was well respected, and it was expected to produce some good information. First day, we ran a sample of logs through the mill and estimated what the volume of lumber was produced from a minimum number of logs. Went back a week later and to measure the lumber that was produced from the kilns, the lumber that was dried. And standing at one of the points where the lumber was going to go into the planer, here's the millwright standing there at the end of the planer with a sledge. And the lumber, in order to get through the planer, he slammed the end of that lumber with the sledge, forcing it through the knives of the planer. The lumber itself was thick on one end, thin on the other. I fondly recall this mill as the thick and thin mill. But needless to say, the results that we got from that mill was not used in our adjustments of overrun factors on down the way. Not valid at all, not typical. I've come to find out that 2 months later that mill was sold to somebody else. So, such as it is. Along with the evaluation process, we've mentioned that the appraisal process relied on costs, logging costs, and manufacturing costs. These were costs that were derived from industry itself, what they had experienced. We developed a sample in the Region V, of mills that were not really above the level of average, not on the downside, but average mills, and collected costs from these mills as well as their production. So we could line up production figures on a per thousand board foot basis for the various phases of production, and tried to get that for both the manufacturing and for the logging. The logging is a little bit more difficult because most of the firms didn't do their own logging, or the small loggers didn't keep books well enough that we could analyze and look at. Once we got that was a cost on an annual basis and updated every 6 months if we could, depending on the manufacturers. Some of the manufacturers had a fiscal year different from others. Some ended early. We would adjust to pick up that information. On an annual basis, we came up with appraisal data that was put together into guidelines that were sent out to the forests in the region to appraise sales that were coming up. The lumber prices were adjusted by Western Timber Association indices, but other than that, it was based purely on the annual collections from industry and mill studies and batch tests. Okay, we had a policy in this region when I first was hired, and still in effect when I was first in the office down there, of sale sizes and authorizations. Sales of 50 million board foot and above were authorized in the chief's office only. They were not delegated down, so any sale of 50 million board foot had to be approved by the Washington office. There were not many of those. That's a pretty large size sale. Regional delegations of authority, 15 million board foot. Anything above 15 million board foot, up to the 50 million board foot, had to be reviewed and approved and were under the authority of the regional forester. Sales below 15 million board foot were delegated to the forest supervisors. Not much was delegated down to the district ranger because the district ranger didn't have the skill yet to handle large size sales. The feeling was at the regional level that most of the forest supervisors didn't have all that much experience either because of the delegation. You know, anything above 15 million was Regional Forestry Authority. Total volume in the region, as far as volume offered on a per year basis, were roughly about 1 billion board foot. A little bit below that, reasonable, but it was quite a large volume compared to now, certainly. So there were quite a few sales that came into the regional office that had to be reviewed, approved, and so on. And that was another one of the jobs that we did in that shop, is to review those. We tried to get them spread out over the year, but most of them bound up in the end of the fiscal year. So quite a few days, and it got down to May, where we were spending weekends reviewing sales in the regional office. That was also a time frame when the emphasis on the 2405 contracts came into being. So we were working with that and the verbiage 2405 contracts. We had a machine that we had regionally brought into the regional office, a word processor. This was just being developed, and any sales that were prepared were printed on it. The verbiage, the special provisions could be printed on that word processor in significant savings of time rather than somebody back on the forest hand typing all of the provisions that went into a timber sale contract. That was a big move. That was a great move. A lot of savings of time. Now that gradually changed over where forest became available to have this kind of equipment too, but at that time it was unique. We also at that time, the region decided that maybe it was time to delegate some of this sale authorization to the forest supervisors. Instead of having all sales 15 million board foot and above come into the regional forester, let the forest supervisor have some of that authority. And there was fear though. Maybe they needed some help. Well, let's create a process whereby we'll give them the original or the additional authority, delegation of authority to 15 million above, but let's create a task force. No, that's not right. Let's create a team, an assistance team that will go out to the forest and provide some additional input, help to them, not mandating stuff, but help, assistance. The region decided to go ahead and do that. I and an engineer were the first guinea pigs to go out to a forest and try this approach. I remember we both got very, very detailed explanations of what this was and what this was not, and the care that we should be using, and whatever it was. We got that from a fairly friendly visit with the Assistant Regional Forester for Timber Management. The next day we got that same concern from the Assistant Regional Forester of Engineering. We needed to do this, we need to take care on how we do it, but it needed to be done. So we did it. And we went to the first forest that made this process set up was Modoc National Forest, northeastern part of the state. The Modoc had some problems. Most forests did, but the Modoc had some problems. A lot of acreage, over 1 million acres. Timber was scattered in pockets, lava rock, and in some places good soil. In some places to get there you had quite a bit of trouble. Anyway, we made visits on all districts, all four districts, and we sat down with them and gave them our estimations and came home. There was no big write-up of a report, thank God. But next one we went on was about 4 months later on the Lassen, and did the same thing. Same, myself and one other person, same individual. A couple months later, Modoc said, "We have a position on the forest. Would you come and be our timber management officer on the forest?" That was a great opportunity. It was not a promotion, however, but it was a transfer to the Modoc as timber management officer, getting back out into the field. This was also good from the wife standpoint because she was born in Lakeview, just less than an hour away, and a lot of her family were still there. So we made the trip. By this time we had 2 boys, and no, I'm sorry, we third came along while we were still down in San Francisco. It was time to get out of there also. We found that drug activity was starting to pick up down there, and the kids, when they were standing on the school bus stop waiting to go to school, other students were trying to sell them drugs. So it was time to get out, and it was a good move. Moved to Alturas, Modoc National Forest in 1970. Modoc was a large national forest, had over 1 million acres up there. The whole county population for Modoc, a little over 7,000 people. This, you could go out into the woods and you can enjoy yourself. You don't have the expectations of running into too many people. Of course, if you get stranded out there, you might have some problems too. But it was a nice forest to be able to go to and to be on. Quite a bit of the, Modoc got bad vibes as far as the rest of the region was concerned. It was remote, it's cold, it's just everything out there. It's too cold a country. Wouldn't want to be there. We kind of encouraged that. The people that were up there on the Modoc says, let them talk. We enjoy it. If you're a hunting fan, it's great. Deer hunting, waterfowl, beautiful. We didn't, but we still loved it. We could, from our house in Alturas, we could take, 10 minutes and walk down to the Pitt River and put a fish line, catch some catfish or whatever. One thing the forest did have some things with, I wouldn't say problems with, the forest was a leader because of the forest supervisor, primarily, in organizational management behavior. Organizational behavior management. I forget the term exactly, but they were quite heavy into it. All the district rangers were expected to be facilitators. Fortunately, the forest supervisor didn't require that of his staff officers, fortunately. We had exercises there on the forest. We had trips down to Reno. It got to the point where the families were involved. And by the time it finished, there were several divorces that resulted from this. Improvement in working together, or working with others, I'm not so sure that happened. I do remember one case of one of the trips in Reno where we were getting together between district rangers and forest staff in one of the sessions to improve relationships. One of the district rangers ended up going to the emergency hospital because of one of the staff people laid a chair leg across its head. So that really didn't improve things too much. Back to the forest, though. That was serious business, and it did create quite a few problems. I think more problems than the process itself solved on the forest. We get into training sessions. Driver training, that was one of my responsibilities, to try to improve driver facilities on the forest. And we brought in an outside speaker. He was told very, very clearly, do not get into any team building exercises at the beginning of your presentation. If you do, we'll probably lose the entire class. Unfortunately, he did, and he did lose the entire class. We had problems getting the class back in to resume the training exercises. But it happened. The Modoc was a beautiful forest, but again, it was a forest that was not commonly viewed as a place to go, a place to work, because it was remote. The finances, it was thought the finances didn't go to the forest because it was remote. The assistance that was needed didn't get to the forest because it was remote. We shared somewhat of a philosophy with the forest immediately across the line in Oregon, the Fremont. They felt the same way with their region, but they got road equipment, they got road monies to build roads and such, and how did they do that? We didn't, but still we were the outcasts. It worked. We loved it. Let the rest of the world go by. We loved it. There was some unique situations there between the Fremont and the Modoc also, and that was what was called a federal sustained unit. Oregon in the Fremont National Forest had a federal sustained yield unit called the Fremont unit. We had one on the Modoc called the Big Valley Federal Sustained Yield Unit. It was unique in that there was only 5 in the whole nation. Only 5. And this was established originally with the intent of ensuring industry would be able to thrive, be able to exist in some of these areas that were a little bit on the remote side. They would be able to bring industry into the area. They would be able to support a population. Our Big Valley Federal Sustained Unit, when I went up there, had 2 sawmills. The restrictions on the unit was that they had to manufacture essentially all of the logs that were harvested from trees in that unit at facilities in the unit. They could not export the logs out of the unit. They could go outside of the unit to purchase logs, though, and bring them in to manufacture lumber, but that was, it's a one-way door. As far as the other industry outside of that, they could not go into that unit at all to purchase lumber, logs. It created a little bit of anguish with the other mill, but they understood what was going on and they didn't rock the boat too much. We had a situation where we had to update the timber management plan for that forest. And it was kind of a labor-intensive process. This was primarily a development of a plan for the forest for the harvesting of timber over a period of time that would guarantee that the timber that was harvested would not exceed the sustained yield for that piece of land. We developed it to the point where we went to meetings at each of the districts to, lay out what it was, what the results were. All the meetings that we had, with one exception, more Forest Service people were at the meetings than general public. One district we had 4 from the general public show up. And they had a mill in town, so they had some interest, or at least you would think they had some interest in volume that was going to be offered for the next 10-year period. Big Valley, however, with the federal sustained yield unit in it, had much more interest. It coincided with a hearing to justify or to evaluate whether the federal sustained yield unit should be retained or whether it should be absolved. We had over 100 people show up at that meeting. But we had to have a hearing officer also, official hearing officer. So it was much more involved. They had much more to lose if they lost the unit, at least so they thought. The budgeting process for timber management really comes to light on the Modoc, as far as I'm concerned, because this is the first time that I actually involved in it, deeply involved in it. My shop, timber management for the forest, is to represent the forest supervisor in this program area. The districts are doing the actual work, but then I need to ensure that the work is being done, and it's being done to the standard that the forest supervisor wants. Budgeting is part of this process. How do you budget for this work, or can you budget for this work? Is it realistic, reasonable? Budgeting process that the Forest Service used, and I think still does, although I cannot vouch for that, but I think it still does, is essentially a 2-year basis. The first year, the regional forester comes out with some policy direction of what he would like to see, or she would like to see for the next year, 2 years, so on. What are the emphasis items? Each forest then takes that and develops a rough cost of doing that. That is submitted back to the regional forester, and a year hence, when Congress sees the wisdom of coming forth with a budget, that's fed on down the line, and the forest supervisor receives the input from the regional forester. Hopefully it is somewhat copacetic with our original input that we asked for in terms of money and allocations to specific areas. If it isn't, then we've got to go through a magic wand type of thing, try to get it such that we can deal with it for that next year. In most cases, this comes out pretty good. You follow the preliminary direction that you get from the regional forester. Normally, it doesn't vary too much from the final allocations. If it does, then you do have some problems, and it can be worked out generally. But we had on the forest here, as I mentioned, the management behavioral type of thing, and the forest supervisor there felt strongly that it should be honored. So far as he was concerned, the direction that came down from the regional forester in this one year for direction, some of the district rangers didn't really want to do that. They thought that more money should be going into another functional area. So they came up with a proposal, and it was fed back up to the region, and everything was fine, or so they thought. They'd finally be able to get the money where they thought they should have the money. In this case, it was range. They wanted to take the money from timber and put it over in range. And some of it was justified because, the range budget was extremely in the negative areas, and Modoc was high range area. The budget came to the forest, and lo and behold, what a shock. They got the targets that the regional forester said originally would be there, but they didn't get the money to carry it out. So we had 2 districts that were on crying. They were in the crying mode. It's not fair. It's not fair. Well, they got stuck with it. They got the targets. They didn't get the money. How were they going to deal with it? They farmed their people out. They farmed their people out to adjoining districts. They farmed their people out to fire duties, anything that would cover the minus dollars that they didn't end up with. The budgeting process works only if you want to make it work. You don't play games with it. They found out the hard way on that one. We had a large fire occurrence on that forest. I believe it was along about 1977. It's called the Scarface fire. There was another smaller area adjoining to it. 70,000 acres burned. A lot of timber was lost. A lot of rangeland burned. Wildlife habitat, of course. If you burn the vegetation, you're going to influence the wildlife habitat. But we had a big program, again, on salvage. And fortunately, those guidelines that I had worked with and the region had come out with back when I was on the Camptonville district on the Tahoe came into play again. And they were very, very valuable guidelines. We put those to work quite readily. We did have some problems, though, with manpower. Because 70,000 acres, and of course all of this is not commercial land. It's not, supporting timber. A lot of it's lava rock. A lot of it's, just hard, low site country. But still, a lot of areas. And we got some adjacent help. Other forests next to us provided some manpower for us, and even altering their timber offer programs to an extent that we could go ahead and offer fire-killed timber on a priority basis. We have problems on the forest because of its remoteness. How do we deal with taking on additional manpower, getting the job sufficiently done when you have to travel so far and over extremely poor roads in the case of where we were? What we did was to hang on with fire camp. When the fire camp started to no longer be needed for fire suppression activities, we held it for another week. And we used the fire camp facilities to man the base for our people to not only stay, to eat, to shower, to whatever. Cut down on the travel expenses, cut down on the trip, and so on. Used very good. We were fortunate that we had a lot of seed in the seed bank, so we could go ahead and start getting the regeneration accomplished with available seeds that we had on board. We had the area laid out in such a way that we could do what we needed to do with the sale areas as far as road construction, reconstruction, to allow the salvage sales to be offered promptly. The target, as is most cases, is to offer the sales in such a way to get the sales accomplished, the harvest accomplished, within 2 years of the fire. And we did that. So we didn't lose too much in the way of deteriorating timber. Successful. Scarface resulted in quite a bit of acreage that needed to be reforested. Unfortunately, the region didn't have their act together in terms of a paper that would allow us to use herbicides. The reforestation paperwork that the region had was outdated. It did not meet the specifications or the needs as established by the newly created environmental NEPA, the Environmental Impact Analysis process. There was an effort made to try to rectify some of that, and that effort that was made to try to rectify it was to request myself and Ken Estes from the Lassen National Forest, who was the forest silviculturalist there, to come down to the regional office and help update the paperwork. Shouldn't take long. Get it done so that we have the authority to go ahead and use the pesticides that are needed. We tried that. We made an effort to fly down Monday morning and fly back Friday. We spent about 2 months trying to do that, and we got nowhere really, because we were in a quandary. What to do? We can go through on our own and try to correct the paperwork and make the changes that were needed, but that didn't fit the requirements of the NEPA process, and the guidelines were constantly being updated on what that process was and how it was to be done. And finally we got to the point where we determined that we would not be able to do that on a weekly jaunt unless we spent a little bit more time at it. So we made a recommendation to the regional forester to let's back off on that, and let's look at the establishment in the region of a individual that could head up that effort and go through the required associations of the specialists and involvement of the public. And that was done. And it only took them 2 years to get the final, accomplishment, but it was done. And we would not have been able to do that at all. During the time on the Modoc, the region made a serious effort to try to improve the techniques in administering timber sale contracts, and also to improve the abilities to do the silvicultural approaches that really should have been done way back when. They developed our Silviculture Certification Program, and they developed a certification program for the sale administration. I got involved in some of those on a remote basis because of the need to have people involved in it from the forest. On the sale administration certificate program, I got involved more deeply. I became a regional forester representative and headed up teams to go to other forests to look at the sale administration that was being done. Now, the idea behind these certification programs for sale administration was to make sure that the individuals that were doing the sale administration knew what they were supposed to be doing, knew the contract requirements, knew why they were doing it. not simply going out and doing whatever it felt good. Sale administration was to get uniformity within the region, to get uniformity and to get acceptance with the industry. To be honest about it, it was deplorable before they developed the Sale Administration Certification Program. We got to the point where it was my turn to move again. Got a promotion in 1980 to the Stanislaus National Forest. Beautiful forest, good forest supervisor. Had a reputation, however, performance. You don't perform, you're out. Forest supervisor gained a reputation of wanting performance, and if you don't perform, you're out. He gained that experience on an adjacent forest that he was on prior to the Stanislaus. I heard lots of crying and rattling of the sabers, you might say, but unfortunate people didn't do it. They didn't exist on the jobs. They got moved to Modoc. Stanislaus is good forest. It had a lot of people on it that were good performers, and the shoes that I was stepping into was high. Okay, he was good. We again got into the situation of budgeting. We got into the situation of pesticides, highly controversial, more so here than Modoc by far because of the centralization of people and the opposition to use of pesticides. Became much more difficult to do the reforestation business because of a different nature of plant, bear clover. Bear clover hard to treat without the use of pesticides. The Stanislaus National Forest was just in the process of completing their forest inventory, and rather than a separate timber management plan for the forest, as we had done on the Modoc, this inventory and data was to be incorporated into the new forest land management plan. This was the first effort that the forest had made to develop a forest land management plan, hopefully recognizing all resources and all needs on the forest. We did our part, and the forest was working mightily to get their accomplishment for the forest land management plan, and it has been reviewed, and it has been approved, and it has been appealed, and it has been modified, and it has been, over time, the simple plan took a lot of effort. They finally got it several years later, but it finally was approved. The effort in total, somewhat questionable, I guess, whether we got something from it or not. I would hope to think that we got something from it. I would hope to think that NEPA and the National Forest Management Act and so on justified the large incursion of cost. The environmental costs, I'm sure, benefited from it, but it also had an effect on the resources. We don't have, as a long-term result of some of these activities, lawsuits, we don't have the kind of management on the ground that we once had. My perspective, I think we've lost something. We've lost the ability to manage that ground out there, and as a result, we are seeing some effects now. We have over the past couple of years with the amount of beetle kill in pines. But, different item, different subject. I think the planning effort required much more involvement of people in the planning process. And also, along with that, lawsuits created a situation that we wanted to try to develop paperwork that was defendable when it got to court. Decisions had to be defendable. Time requirement. People to do this requirement. Less people on the ground? Yes, there was, but without those decisions, there wasn't any work on the ground to be done anyway. So it's kind of a little bit of a toss-up there, but yes, it did require much more in the way of time, energy, and frustration. You no longer got the satisfaction of seeing something accomplished. It raised heck with something on the ground. We ended up on the Stanislaus with another situation. Along came another fire. We had the Stanislaus Complex. Stanislaus Complex 87, I think that's the right year, resulted in 145,000 acres burned. Not all of that was National Forest land. A lot of that land was fiberboard. Reforestation needs, salvage needs, a lot of volume. We again had a target. The target was created by deterioration. The rate of deterioration is our target. 2 years from the fire, we had to have most of that salvage out. We did. We did some different things on it. Private land didn't have to do all the steps that we had to do on National Forest land. We still had to go through the NEPA process. We still had to do all of that paperwork. We couldn't shortcut it. We didn't have some of that stuff that the state had set up for early salvage. We had people that worked their tail ends off. There were lots of hours spent. We had people laying out sails before the fire was out. And not necessarily on the ground, but they were laying them out on the paper. Engineering was doing work to get some of the roads, main roads, pre-roaded, reconstructed prior to we offer any sales. This required coordination not only on the forest, but with the regional office too, and support, a lot of support. We had the Salvage Sale Fund, which was a new entity that we borrowed money from the region through the Salvage Sale Fund that we could put additional hours into making these sales available. We did not have the luxury that we had on the Modoc. We could not adjust other sales, green sales, to delay, to take advantage of time to offer burnt. The region wouldn't support that. So we tried what we did. We could borrow people adjacent to the, adjacent forests, and we did get some people, but primarily it was the people here on this forest. And they did good. The sale burnt in, I believe, September. We offered the first sale before the end of the year. I say a lot of good work. All of the salvage was completed within 2 years of the burn. We had major problems, though, in terms of how are we going to reforest the area. Large area, our seed bank did not support that many seedlings. Seedlings grown at the Placerville Nursery Nursery wasn't large enough. But between doing some things, the nursery expanded to meet our needs. We created a program on the forest here that was more I&E effort, but it did get us some good results. Lonacone was advertised on TV and the local paper here. Lonacone, okay, well, subheading on that was sex in the treetop. Get your eye. And it did. The local people volunteered to have their trees loaned to the Forest Service in terms of seed collection. We got professional tree climbers out of the Placerville Genetics Lab that would climb the trees and take the cones. We would take the cones, extract the seed at the nursery, and grow the seedlings. This was necessary because of the zoning. We had to have seed from the same rough approximate area as where we were going to plant. Most of the seed we needed was a ponderosa because of the site that existed on the burn was a drier site suitable for ponderosa pine. We felt also that much of the other species, primarily the incense cedar and the fir, would seed in from adjacent trees over longer distances. And that did prove correct. But we still felt that we had another need, and we did not have it, and that was for the higher elevation fir and red fir. We tried something else that we hadn't tried before, I hadn't seen in the region before, and that's cone rake. A cone rake was I believe Fendrick, I believe that's the name, was the developer of it, and it was a metallic ring with, just like a rake, with tongs going out inwards, and it would be fastened to that ring. It would be supported by cable from a helicopter, and this ring would drop over the top of a tree that was loaded with cones. Now, red fir, if you remember, is high cone production in the top of the tree, where most of the cones are produced. Anyway, they drop the cone, drop this over the top of that tree and get it down over where most of the cones are. Then the helicopter would rise, pulling the ring up, severing the cones from the tree, and that cone then would be brought over to the ground, and a crew would jump on that and remove the cones, and then the helicopter would take that and go to another tree and harvest the cones. That resulted in a good production of primarily red fir cones for the higher elevations. So we got our seed stock back to where it should be, where we could go ahead with seedling production. We still had another problem, and that's the soil preparation. Much of our area was inhabited by bear clover. Okay, mountain misery. It is a beautiful plant. It looks nice. It has pretty white flowers on it in the springtime. You walk through it and you wish to God you hadn't. I mean, it's like tar, and it sticks to you on a hot day. Oh my gosh, you take your pants off at the end of the day and they won't fold. You can stand them up. They'll stand by themselves. They're so heavy with the tar. But it has one heck of a root system. Bear clover is an ideal plant if you want to hold soil. But if you want to try to plant a tree in it, you cannot get enough nutrients and moisture that allow that seedling to survive. So you have to control it. If you don't control it, you might as well throw your seeds away. You cannot do it. You have to control it one way or another. It's been tried dozer blading and digging it, and whatever. The roots go down 3 foot easy. Good soil, you'll have them lower than that. And it forms a very heavy mat. The pesticides were still tied up by not having an EIS being prepared by the regional forester. We didn't have a decision yet that we could use the pesticides. It was tied up in court, tied up in that document. Lots of local opposition for pesticides anyway. And once we got the approval, then we had protesters outside the office up here, protesting with signs, little rabbits walking around protesting, you name it. We finally got it. We finally did apply some of the pesticide out there and got some good results. Another tool we tried was something that the Sierra National Forest had used earlier with some fairly good success. Was a deep soil wing machine tacked on the back of a cat. Instead of the grouser bellies that you would normally use to rip soil, this was deep. It went down deeper, and it had wings on it, and it cut. It not only disturbed the soil, but it cut the roots of the bear clover. And several passes allowed the soil to be available, the moisture to be available for the seedling on a short-term basis. So we were able to get seedlings established, and in most cases established quite adequately that they would survive. One big problem with all of this is that, funding is limited. We were able to get the funding for the reforestation from the KV funds, from funds that were collected from the timber sales for reforestation. And we were able to do that because the value was there. The timber, even though it was burnt, had value. We got it out before it started deteriorating. What little blue stain was fairly minor. It did develop enough value that we could go ahead and do our reforestation efforts that was needed. There was still a problem in financing though, because some of the areas that we harvested soon enough, we could not get to soon enough for the reforestation effort. It drug on too long. We originally planned that we were going to have 5 years available to get the reforestation accomplished. It didn't materialize primarily because we didn't have the tools available to us, pesticides. So we had to back off on quite a bit of that acreage. It's unfortunate, but it did. It's now permanently, I think, for another 100 years or so at least, converted to brush. We've used mastication. We've used all different sorts of tools to try to get some of this area controlled, but it's beyond it now. And I don't think aerial application of pesticides are in the cards. Okay, back to the salvage. Important thing, I think, as far as I believe very, very strongly, our guidelines that we used to determine whether a tree should be harvested or not, mortality standpoint, should be recognized. These guidelines are extremely valuable. They are very easily written, and interpretation should be very clear. They are guidelines. I think anybody that is going to use them recognizes that they're not 100% foolproof. That if used, the majority of times you will be able to determine whether a tree is going to survive or not. There will be exceptions, but the guidelines themselves are pretty sound. They've been sound for many years, and they have been developed over lots of history throughout the Sierra Nevada. They're good guidelines. Don't throw them away. One thing I wanted to mention, the KV funds, I've already mentioned that as far as the reforestation effort and being able to use those funds to get the reforestation accomplished. They have a time limit on availability. And if you plant large areas, you're going to have a need somewhere down the road to break those areas up into some sort of a system that is recognizing fire potential. You don't want a catastrophic burn again if you can help minimize it. KV funds can't be used for it because of its time limit on utilization. Other funds are limited. So, it would be nice if somebody would develop a system that would be foolproof to do this. Laying out the original plantations, and no matter how you do it, not going to work, because intervening places, if you allow fire breaks, sheltered fuel breaks, whatever you want to call it, they all revegetate. They all grow plants, and they get dense, and they create fire potential. So it's a real loser if you can't do something after you've done the plantation work. You can thin, which is good, requires money. Thin densely requires money. But you need to do something later on down the road, prior to the time that it gets to commercial size material that you can do on its own. This is one of the problems we're into on new forestry here, where the limitations have been established for a feasibility for removal of small material. You can't remove anything above a diameter limit. You can't pay for it then. How do you do it? Well, the obvious answer is you don't do it. I mean, this is what the large majority of our population would like to see. Don't harvest those trees. Let it be natural. Then it gets dense and they start dying. Nature will take care of it. We're seeing that with the bug kills. Somehow or another we need to accomplish our desires reasonably, and we're not doing that now. Prior to the Stanislaus Complex Fire, we had a study being made, private industry, that looked at the utilization potential for biomass in the creation of a energy facility. Specifically, this one was located, or was going to be located, someplace in the area of Chinese Station. It has been located there now. The study was proven worthwhile to do. We created a situation with the establishment of that facility for possibly removing some of our burn-killed smaller material on the Stanislaus Complex. And we did that successfully in a large majority of areas by encouraging industry to remove some of this material, not by establishing new standards, small diameter standards that had to be removed, but we offered the opportunity to industry that if you do this, we will offset some of that cost. And this was through the manipulation of BD funds that we had set up in the timber sale contracts themselves, deposits that the purchaser would make. Those deposits, in some cases, were eliminated if the purchaser removed some of that material. And it was successful in quite a few of the areas, to the point where we were able to reduce the hazards that would have had to take care of before we had the reforestation effort made. We have an area on the forest that's adjacent to Yosemite National Park. It's not a tremendously large area, but it is timbered. It was once roaded by going through Yosemite National Park to a lookout that's established right on the edge of the park. It however, being in the forest, but we could not get to it because of the road going through the park. There's no commercial use of roads coming in out of the park. The alternative to reach this area, and we felt it was justified because we were getting a lot of kill on this area by primarily insect. They were hitting the older trees, and the older trees were showing a lot of mortality. Older trees, larger volume. We had looked at the area for quite some time as far as possible roading the area, but it was, too steep, too rocky, too costly. So we worked at the aspects of doing some helicopter. We looked at that. Helicopter logging of these dead, dying trees. The area in question that we were talking about is a fairly small area. It's maybe a few hundred acres, maybe a little bit more. It's certainly less than what originally would be required if you were to establish roadless areas. It is much less than the 5,000 acre guideline for roadless areas. However, our local environmental population really likes this area. And we knew that. We were understanding that. But there wasn't a lot we could do with it. If we didn't road it, why, that would be one thing. The area would still be there. Or stumps would be there too, but you couldn't see them. We went ahead with the idea and worked with the regional office, and they decided that if you went with a helicopter logging aspect for this area and no road construction, because of the need to promptly get to it, we'll make an exception on the appeal regulations. You still have to do the NEPA, but we will disallow any appeal that might come in. So we took advantage of that, and we went ahead with the sale. We had some special language written into the contract, however, which was a little different. It did not pertain to the concern by the environmental group so much as making it easier on ourselves. We wrote in to the contract that the trees would be designated for cutting only if they met the following specifics. No green branches except the top 10 feet. If the top of 10 feet of the tree had green branches, it could be cut if there were no other green branches anywhere on that tree. So we designated the trees that would be removed. And we went ahead with it, and successfully. We had one situation where a faller, after the sale was made, where a faller cut a tree that should not have been cut. The sale operation ceased, and the purchaser was required to, guarantee that that would not happen in the future, and we went ahead with it. It's my understanding that the faller that did that left California. Not deep six, but left California. And the sale was completed on time with good results. Emphasis, a while back shortly before I retired, was trying to get away from doing some of these textbooks, timber cutting, without really defining what it was that was to be done. A lot of propaganda, call it that if I do, called New Forestry. This is some of the stuff that came out of the spotted owl controversy. SAF in journals, talked a lot to New Forestry, how we were going to solve the concerns of the environmentalists and meet the needs of the public for timber. But nowhere was it really defined on what this new forestry was or how it was to work. Great confusion, and I'm not sure it even now exists, except we're to the point now where we really can't do much of anything. We don't have control on our forest at all, and it's not going to be with us long if we can't do something. It also happened to be the first year the Forest Service experienced a pay system called differential pay. And we were on a 25% differential pay, which doesn't mean too much, except what the Forest Service was trying to do is to cut down on some of their costs, but also make sure that they had people available during the off hours in the event that a fire might occur. It ended up on you put in 8 hours during the day working at miscellaneous jobs, whether it be training or actual, other type of maintenance work, firefighting, whatever. But in addition to that 8 hours, you had a 2-hour period of time during that day that you were expected to be there. Now, you didn't have to work those 2 hours if it wasn't any fire, but you had to be there, on base, dressed, ready to go. On weekends, usually a Saturday or a Sunday, depending on how your tour was, also committed to being there. No pay other than that 25% differential. Now, you went on a fire and you worked during that period of time, you got the 25% differential. There wasn't any overtime for that period of time. Consequently, at the end of that season, I sat down and looked at what I had accomplished, other than a lot of enjoyment. Because, it was still hard work, but it was enjoyment. You were working your butt off. 55 cents an hour is what I earned for that period of time. That includes the normal work during and the overtime, whatever. But 55 cents, still, it was worthwhile. A lot of people, a lot of old employees of the Forest Service, after experiencing that year of differential, went to work for LA County. LA County gained a lot of good people. Differential pay still exists. With the differential pay, you no longer got overtime pay for that. So you had a terrific difference in the pocketbook, and LA County paid overtime in addition to the straight time. So they did quite well. After retiring, I got to thinking about it, and I retired from the Stanislaus National Forest here after 34 years working for the Forest Service. Good years, enjoyable, productive, I felt. But we retired in the southern motherlode of what's, the gold country. Highway 49. I started on Highway 49 at the northern end of the motherlode. I missed one of the exercises or one of the field trips that the geology professor offered in a class while I was going to Pasadena City College. They had an Easter field trip. I couldn't go on it. Money was too great. Money was too shy for my needs. And I was not able to go, but I actually saw it. I actually lived it. I see the rocks, the formations, the buildings that they would have seen, and I enjoyed it. It was worthwhile. Following the employment with the Forest Service, I still see the need for some sort of community activity, some sort of community support for conservation, for the multiple use of our national forests, our resources. I joined 2Care, and 2Care was a I think positive overall. They have an influence. They have an influence locally that is good. And I worked with them. I was on the board of directors for about 6 years, I believe. And I think we did something. I'm still a member of it and still support 2Care. Tuolumne County Alliance for Resources and the Environment. They are an individual group that obviously is supported by industry, not just timber industry, but also ranching. They are not a group that is pro tie everything up. They want some wise use. Conservation is good for them. Multiple use is good. While I was in 2Care, they had a project that they worked with the environmentalists on. I wasn't too gung-ho about it, but the environmentalists want to see the Clavey River tied up as a rare and scenic river. They did a lot of activity with it. We had a utility that wanted to dam the Clavey River for power generation. Our Tuolumne County here joined with them for a period of time in support of that. That was battled up one side and down the other, and finally it lost ground when the Energy Commission would not support the determination and the opinion that was offered to it by TUD. As following that, the effort was made, and it was approved through the Forest Service at least, that it be a rare and scenic river. It was never approved. Congress never approved that. But along with that was a commitment for the standards that the scenic river would meet on that, and the environmental groups wanted to ensure that the Forest Service maintained that standard. So they got together, and 2Care was part of it, as well as other entities, state, local, a lot of different agencies got together and looked at it to see if the standards that were being met actually met the standards that were prescribed by the rare and scenic river guides. They did. They met. It looks good. But on the second part of that was a recommendation be made that a watershed analysis or assessment be made of the Clavey River. And the Forest Service was in the process of doing those type of assessments on some other watersheds in the region. The Clavey River was identified as one of those that probably high up on priorities for that analysis. So I, representing TUCARE, I thought, representing TUD more specifically, I joined that committee. And 6 years later, a decision was made and a product was completed, and it looks good. The one weakness I have with it is that it pinpoints what we were talking about earlier. There is too dense vegetation. The vegetation cannot be supported by itself. It must be thinned. It must be controlled one way or another. Right on. Not too long ago, the Rim Fire came through. Guess where it burned? Much of the Clavey River. So it's, it's there. We still need to do something, but God, we need to take care of our forest resources. Going to University of California at Berkeley, I was given a chance to join an organization that I really hadn't heard of before. I'm from Southern California. I'm not from lumbering or anything else. But SAF, Society of American Foresters, professional society. We heard about it at school, and there was a national meeting, whatever that was SAF. And again, I'm not sure now where it was. I think it was San Francisco. I'm not sure the year. But I went, attended a portion of it. Couldn't attend a lot of it because I still had the studies that, would not be, forgiven. Attended a portion of it and became a student member of SAF. It was, I thought, an organization that really was great. What I heard at the presentations, I wish I could remember it. I can't. And it was a popular effort at school. We attended a few local meetings, not student meetings, but chapter meetings there in the Bay Area. Impressive. But again, limitations on what could be done, both in terms of time and cost, to attend this type of thing. Graduated from Berkeley, and then moving to Nevada City was the thing then. Nevada City had a very, very strong chapter of SAF, and I attended that. And it was, at that point, the options were not really, do you want to attend or not? The expectation was that you will attend. And we had a forest supervisor there at that location that, you will attend. You don't have a choice. You will attend. And you will participate. Maybe that's why we had such a strong chapter up there. I don't know. But it's a relatively short duration for me because I moved on, and some of the areas after that were markedly void of any kind of a strong representation from SAF. We've got moved from there down to the Bay Area, and the Bay Area again was a strong representation of SAF. You had state participation, not too much, but you did have some state. You had a lot of federal, and you did have private industry. Because at that point, San Francisco was still a main hub for some of the industry. Moving from there, one thing to add to that, while being down there in San Francisco, my boss, direct boss, became a chairman of the chapter. And lo and behold, all of a sudden, I found myself being secretary treasurer. I don't know how this happened, but it happened. Coercion? No, I don't think so. Just a good talker. But anyway, I became secretary treasurer for the Bay Area chapter. I think there's several hundred membership at that time. We also hosted at that time the Northern California section meeting. And I can't remember too much of that other than I was doing a lot of paperwork. A lot of money exchanged hands here and there. We had a set up at, I believe it's Spenger's over in Emeryville. The field trip, I believe, was to the Audubon Ranch up by Bodega, egrets and those birds there, which was extremely interesting. But that was good. Moving from there to Alturas, different picture entirely. Alturas, SAF, what's that? If we wanted to go to an SAF meeting, we had to journey a little distance. We didn't have enough people there, really, we felt, to establish a chapter. We made a trip down, several of us getting together and going down to Susanville and having a, meeting, participate there. But for the most part, there wasn't much. There wasn't much at all. This big void. We still kept intact, or in contact, but no, not a partition like that. We on the trip down to Sonora, Stanislaus, back into a chapter meeting. There were chapter meetings, but not overly strong. A program existed. That's about what I can say is a program existed, but it's minimal. Where it is now, it's very minimal. Worthwhile. SAF is very much worthwhile. I would like to see some changes in the publications, though. I have a little bit of I would like to read the Journal of Forestry in the sense that I could understand it. I'm getting old, okay, and I recognize that. But when we start talking about research papers being in the Journal of Forestry, and they don't really pertain to me anymore, they don't pertain to my area, never have, I'm not all that interested. And I'd like to be able to pick up a publication that has, from my standpoint, interest. Now, the journal's good. It's come a long ways. The forestry source is good. The science publications are good. I'd say be careful of what you do. Look it over carefully before you step, because it has materially changed over the years, and it'll probably change again. If you are able to work with people, able to talk to people, able to have them understand you and you understand them, great. That is becoming more important, I think, with every day. The skill of communication wasn't all that necessary, not conflict type resolution. Communicate, yes, but the message that you were trying to deliver wasn't all that controversial. Now, when you talk about management of resources, it's extremely controversial. Oh, you need the skill of communication. I would want to see a forest that is representative of the various ecosystem types. I want to see a forest that is not overstocked, that is not too dense, that provides a habitat to the wildlife as well as meets the needs of the public in terms of whatever resource it is that that forest can deliver.